Live. HLA Live is our regular broadcast on the HLA YouTube channel as well as all the other social media channels. Each week we talk to interesting people from across the HLA community.
Good evening, everyone. I am really excited to be chairing tonight's meeting.
Hi, I'm Rosie Spooner and I'm hosting HLA Live this Wednesday.
And I'm an HLA scholar and I'm also going to be your host this evening.
To share with us their ideas and their innovations and hopefully bring them to a global audience.
Quite quick, we have ideas, let's do this, let's do that. So
many of the topics come from our community, with scholars and faculty expressing an interest in many of the discussions that we're about to have.
Hello everyone and welcome to the HLA Live session on widening participation in the postgraduate realm.
Homelessness and health.
Addiction and the new normal.
HLA programs are built on 6 pillars. The leader is an innovator and entrepreneur. The leader is a communicator. The leader is a manager. The leader as a negotiator. The leader is a follower, and the leader is a philosopher. If you are interested in becoming a HLA scholar, why not get in contact? Many of the episodes in HLA Live will cover one or more of these important pillars. The HLA team consists of Pedra, Eamon, Tim, Riddy, Alistair, Adil and Trisha, and a range of other HLA scholars and faculty.
Fantastic. Okay, so my name is Will Gale and I had the pleasure today to sort of share with you some of the lessons that my co-founder and I have earned and learned during the time we were at med school and whilst we sort of built our first company. Some of the advice I'm hoping to share today is for people who are kind of in a similar position to where I was at, where I was a bit confused, maybe a little bit disillusioned about training to become a doctor, trying to choose a specialty, and just feeling a little bit overwhelmed with the number of different kind of directions you could go in. And so in this sort of presentation, I hope to sort of share with you some insights, both at like a high level, like some of the nuggets that I think are quite essential in helping you to take those next steps. But also I think it's always helpful to blend in like a more practical advice as well. So I'll try and avoid as many cheesy sort of quotes as possible. But, you know, at the very least, I hope you get to have a good laugh at some of the early workings of our products. And yeah, okay. So some of the things I wanted to cover today was just kind of who I am, how I got involved in health technology, how some of the frameworks I used to make the decisions on sort of careers, and also how we went about doing it and sort of understanding when to do it. I also wanted to just share a little bit about Suvera, which is the company that we founded, and the journey we've been on so far, and kind of how we're still at very much the beginning, but to share some of the things that were helpful for us. And like I said, I also want to share some sort of more practical advice so that you can actually take something away from this, which is tangible and something you can do straight away. And then interestingly, I also thought, given the audience being people who have sort of healthcare backgrounds or maybe training as medics or are doctors, kind of some of the similarities I've seen between studying to be a doctor and also the world of startups as well, and how there's some nice parallels that are drawn between them. And then finally, I thought I'd share what I think anyway is the best piece of advice that I've ever received. So I'd be happy to sort of share that along to anyone else who would find it beneficial. But to begin with, I thought I'd just give a bit more of a context as to who I am. So I'm a first generation immigrant child of sort of Asian parents who came to the UK. They were restaurant owners, as you could see sort of on the right hand side. And when they came to the UK, one of their big things was obviously stability and making sure that they could get their kids through school. So I was very fortunate enough to have very loving parents who worked very hard as restaurant owners. And I'm sure many of you will also relate to this, but being a sort of Chinese son, I had a few options, which were sort of law, banking, or medicine. And so I kind of took the medicine card and went that way because it was a very stable profession. And I studied medicine at UCL, and I think, not to go too deep into it, but there was a sort of a big life event that happened for me. The day before my second year written exams, my mum was unfortunately diagnosed with terminal cancer. Big shock. to me at the time, and also not something that I fully understood being in second year. We hadn't really covered much of the cancer modules yet, so I didn't really understand that sort of the extent of what it meant, but I knew it wasn't good. And then over the period of the next couple of years, whilst I was doing my clinical training, she unfortunately passed away. But what it left me with was a real sense of appreciation of time, understanding that time is obviously very precious, and we should be very intentional about how we go about sort of deciding what we want to do. But that aside, bringing it onto a lighter note, it also gave me the ability to think about what I wanted for the first time. I think oftentimes, people do what's best for their family, and if you have the privilege in order to sort of pursue your own passions, then it's a really good and useful thing to do, and really grasp at those opportunities. So I wanted to share a bit about how that kind of influenced my thinking. And I just wanted to also touch on things that I've learned that I think might be useful. So firstly, everyone's journey is super different. I think if you're in these sort of conferences and joining these academies, you're already some of the people who are looking to branch out and expand their interests. I think that social media is a very hit and miss place. I put Instagram and LinkedIn because I know that a lot of people get into sort of difficulties with Instagram because they compare sort of body imaging and all that sort of stuff. I think for high achieving medics, the equivalent of that is LinkedIn, and scouting other people's profiles and seeing that they've already published 1,000,001 papers and also built 1,000 apps, and it can just be very overwhelming. So I think the first thing I want to say is, use social media to connect, but try not to use it to compare, because everyone's very different. And so that brings me on to sort of how I decided on the framework of what I wanted to do. I think I often heard a lot about like following one's passion. I think it's really important that people take that with a little bit of pinch of salt, in my opinion. I think that it's a really helpful thing, but it's a really hard question to answer. It's a bit like when you were doing your med school interview and they asked you, why do you want to be a doctor? I think you often want to really glamorize your answer, but often you don't really know when you're sort of just graduating or only worked a couple of years. So I found this sort of principle that I'm sure you've come across as well. It's called Ikigai. It's a Japanese way of kind of finding one's passion. And it was really helpful because it kind of gave a bit more structure and framework to the decision making. So I'd recommend sort of starting off in sort of the right-hand column, circle even, and just kind of figuring out what the world needs and look at big problems. And kind of more relevant to us as healthcare professionals is look out for the big trends that are happening in healthcare. You'll quickly see what the biggest problems that are going on are and what the world needs. So rather than thinking directly from your own perspective, think about what the world needs as well. And then next on the left circle is, I think it's, probably one of the hardest parts of the circle is figuring out what you're good at. I think it's really difficult sometimes, but I think you tend to gravitate towards it, and asking, close friends and family about what they think you're good at as well is a really good feedback to get. But you have to be quite thick-skinned about taking that feedback. And then thirdly, in the top circle is sort of find out what you love. And I think, again, this is one I really struggled with, but I think that for me anyway, and probably for a lot of people, passions develop over time. And once you get good at something, you end up becoming more passionate about it. So it actually it comes afterwards. You can't always just magic out, this is my passion, this is what I want to do. And then the fourth and final circle, which I think is really important, is what you can be paid for. And I think I look at this last because I think in this modern era, you can carve out revenue streams in so many unique, novel ways that we've never seen before, like social media and all these other things. So I think if you can think about the first three circles, then everything else will sort of follow onwards. And again, sort of my nuggets that I wanted to share that I found helpful myself was I had a lot of feelings of discontent whilst at med school, just feeling like it wasn't the right path for me, and also not fully feeling like I was being able to contribute the best to my ability. And I think try not to ignore those things. I think discontent could be a good thing. It could be a nudge, your internal compass saying you should act on it. And finally, another way of phrasing what you like doing is just figure out what gives you energy. For me, it was hashing out ideas with friends and talking about where we thought the future of health was going to be. That gave me loads of energy, and I kind of listened to that as much as I could. So more practical. So how do you actually get started? So if healthcare startups is the thing you want to go down, then here's some sort of specific points I think you should keep in mind. So typically I think you fall into two camps. The first is you either have a killer idea and you want to shield it from the world, and you don't want to tell anyone because someone might steal your idea. Or you're on the other end of the spectrum where you're just like, I've got no ideas, I can't be an innovator, I'll just have to, not do it, I'm not creative enough. And I think actually the reality probably lies somewhere in the middle for everyone. I don't think it's, so put it another way, I think unless you've discovered something like you're a researcher and you've discovered something with like really high intellectual property, I don't think there's any idea that can't be shared. And I really would encourage you to share your ideas. So if you're thinking of like building an Uber for this or Tinder for that, they're not necessarily really original ideas. So you can share them and sort of bounce ideas off people. And that's the only way you're going to grow your network as well. So I wouldn't be too cautious about it. And then if you fall on the other end of the spectrum where you feel like you can't come up with any original ideas, I know I felt more like that side. Pick a big problem instead. Start with that, and then the solutions will come about. I think sometimes you don't want to force your solution upon anyone. You want to look at a big problem, a big market that you can address, and then you speak to the people who are in that market, and then you figure out what they need, not the other way around. And so on the right, I kind of put in some organizations that really helped me to begin with. So Kickstart London was the student accelerator program that we joined. That was where we basically got a bunch of different computer scientists, engineers, medics, art students together to basically create an idea. And it was like a melting pot really to get people to start brainstorming. Doctorpreneurs, check it out if you haven't already. It's a really great resource to see what other sort of medics have done. NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Program, again, a really good resource if you need to have an extra day off of clinical work in order to pursue some of your passions and just to meet other like-minded people. And I've also put in here Y Combinator. This is like it's not that easy to access. It's a really difficult application process, but these are the guys who've sort of spun out companies like Airbnb, Dropbox, Reddit, massive companies. But I put it there because people always talk about surround yourself with people who you admire or you want to be like. I don't think it has to be physical in this day and age. I think if you read a lot, if you listen to podcasts and you're sort of always listening to these things, I think that can be a really helpful way to immerse yourself as well. And I think immersing yourself is one of the best practical steps I can recommend. It's very cheesy again, but lots of self-help books talk about how thoughts leads to words, leads to actions. And I think that's a very, very true sentiment. And kind of be mindful of who you spend your time with. I mean, if you have an idea and you share it with some people who are kind of conservative, who haven't done it before, then they might shoot you down. Whereas if you speak to other entrepreneurs who have given stuff a go, they'll always encourage you to keep on brainstorming because you might have to just, there's some nuance to that idea. So I wanted to just show you and sort of show you that we practice what we preach. We started off in med school with a medication management platform. So these were the early wireframes. So we literally had a piece of paper, we drew it down and we said, what if we had an app that reminds people to take their meds because people seem to not comply very well? So we then got some software and we started playing around with some design tools, and eventually we were able to sort of hack it away with some computer scientists, people who were able to help us, and we built a really basic app where you could actually put your medication in and track it. But we realized that wasn't the solution to the problem. It was a very deep behavioral issue. People who don't take medications do it for a variety of reasons. It's not just for not being notified. So then we pivoted and we said, what's the problem? The problem is that long-term conditions has so many facets. So we built a blood pressure management app. That went quite well. We launched it to a group of patients, but then we realized that actually a lot of people don't have access to smartphones. Some of the most vulnerable, hard to engage patients need other channels to communicate with them. So we pivoted to more of a clinical team. So having a team that is powered by technology that enables you to reach to more people and really get to the heart of what's stopping people from engaging and looking after themselves. And so I guess this is just, and by no means are we, successful, quote unquote. We've made progress and we're still going, which is already a testament to startups. But it's more just to highlight that you should just start. and things will unfold, and you'll get closer and closer and closer to what would be a really good solution to that problem. And yeah, don't be afraid of people critiquing you as well. There will be a lot of people who doubt you or might envy you for what you do, but people who've been through it are often the ones who are most supportive. So you know, really do lean on those. I wanted to also just touch a bit about the blend between medicine startups and how I find that they're both a bit of an art and a bit of a science at the same time. So you've already heard me sort of hammer on about focusing on the problem and then thinking about the solution. I think that there are multiple stages, and sort of to focus primarily on where I think we're on sort of more of the left at the moment, where we're still trying to find product market fit. We've not hit that super scale phase yet, but you really want to be able to speak to your customers as much as you can. And one of the really nice sayings is Henry Ford says, if you asked people whether or not they wanted what they wanted as a solution, they would have said a faster car. Sorry, a faster horse, but instead, they actually needed a car. So one of the things that I think is really important is to distill what the problems that people are saying actually are. So in our world, for instance, we're trying to help GPs in primary care, and they often talk about needing more efficiency, right? It's a very high volume profession. They see loads of patients, and so they want faster, more integrations and saving, 5 seconds. And they might want a faster electronic health record where each click saves them a few seconds. And that might be a good solution, and it might be helpful, but it's only very incremental. And actually the heart of the problem is that they're overworked and there's not enough supply and demand, right? There's not enough supply to meet the demand. And so really what's going to overhaul and change the thing is to change the workflows. So actually maybe it's a patient sees a nurse first rather than seeing a doctor in the first instance, or maybe it's that they have a digital triage, collects information and then passes it on to the clinicians. These are all things that still solve their problem, but it wouldn't have necessarily been what they originally would have conjured up themselves. The second thing I wanted to say is that the thing that it's very much an art and a science. People have tried to really calculate how to make a startup successful, because obviously there's a big reward for doing so, but it really isn't that clear what it is. But one thing I think is quite universally agreed upon is that as a small company or as a small startup, you have the ability to move very quickly. And so one of the things that really makes big organizations struggle is that when market changes or when they need to adopt new technologies, there's so many layers of organizational bureaucracy they have to get through that they just don't release their products in time. Whereas when you're small and agile, you have that as your main benefit, is that you can do things really quickly. So it might seem as though you'd be thinking, well, how could I compete against the big players? Well, you can do things at a much quicker pace, and you can demonstrate very early wins really quickly. And I think if I was to share sort of a bit about fundraising as well, because if you're starting off sort of on the far left here, when you're at the prototype stage, I think a really healthy way to think about how to raise money is put yourself in the shoes of the investor. And so what would you want to see, right? You obviously want to make sure that your money has a return. So you want to reduce the risk. And what reduces risk? Well, you look at who's operating the company. Are they are they experts in their space? Do they have an initial traction? Have they already got some customers going? Have they already making some money? And all of these things are what pushes you up this scale of getting to product market fit and then scaling. And so constantly you're trying to de-risk the business and figure out how to make it more of a solid thing that you're creating. And without going into minutiae, all the different funding rounds kind of correspond to where you're at in terms of this product market fit of how useful is your solution to the customers and whether or not anyone will buy it. And I did warn you at the beginning, I do love analogies. And one of the things that people talk about with product market fit is it feels as though at the beginning you're pushing a boulder up the hill. You're constantly pushing, it's really, really hard. And that's what getting to product market fit is. Afterwards, once you've reached that level, you will have loads of customers asking for your products, and it feels like the boulder is running down a hill and you're trying to chase after it. And that's the challenge then, is trying to keep up with the boulder. So scaling, growing the team and doing all that sort of stuff. We've not got there yet, but I anticipate that hopefully is a problem that we have to deal with. So closing thoughts is, I think really be clear on what your own dreams are and what you're trying to achieve. I think if you're not intentional about what you're doing, you will end up building someone else's dream. And I think the Ikigai framework is a good way to start it and to really try and articulate some of those thoughts. There's no correct way to do this. I don't think that any journey is better or worse than others. It's very personal, and startups may or may not be your thing. And it's just that I think sometimes we get very much caught up on the hedonic treadmill of needing to follow the path that's prescribed to us, especially as sort of healthcare professionals. And I think stepping outside of that and realizing that there actually isn't a race, or there isn't anything that you have to do, you should do, you know, it's a very freeing mindset to be in. And just touching on that as well, everyone's definition of success is different. And yeah, so be very intentional of what you want to do, and I think you will have fewer regrets. And I think just tying it back to sort of with my mum, I think the main thing that I reflected on in her final months was that the things we shared, you know, the stories we shared were just experiences that we had. It wasn't money, it wasn't anything else. It was all about the experiences, and we touched on those. And I think really your career or whatever you do should just be an abundance of different experiences that you enjoy having. So I've left a teaser here, which is what's the best piece of advice I've ever received. And it was this. I asked this man, I said, please, could you tell me what I should do? And he said, well, stop asking people like me for advice. Just figure out what it is that you want in your life, and then start asking those same people for favors. And that's what I started doing. So thank you very much for listening, and yeah, happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you so much for this talk and sharing your story. It's been so inspiring and just really interesting, and I've learned so much, and I have tons of questions, as I'm sure our audience does as well. I think we have a few minutes before the next speaker, and if you still have time, I would love to hear about a little bit more about the early stages of when you started. I know you touched upon how you started with just drawing the diagrams, and initially you were thinking of just having an app that reminds people which medications to take. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the early stages of this product development, how you went about it, and how you decided this is the way to go.
Yeah. So it's a really great question. So we started off seeing that medication management was an issue. I think we were sort of in GP placements, and we saw that patients just weren't taking their meds properly. So that we identified that there was a problem. And then we followed the lean startup model, which I think people should read, Eric Ries's book. It basically, it's when you're a broke student, how do you do anything? That's kind of what the point of the book is. And we had clipboards, we printed out these questionnaires, and we would stood outside pharmacies and hospitals, and we'd ask patients, why is it that you don't take your medications? And I think one thing we didn't do very well was we drew out the answers we wanted to hear. We didn't really listen to what they wanted. So that was it confirmed that it was a problem. Then like you said, we drew out what a solution might look like. And then we quickly realized, we're medics. What are we doing trying to build an app? How do you even go about doing it? We're not designers. So spend time with other people who have other skills to you. It sounds so obvious, but it is the way to do it. And when we met these engineers and stuff, and the way to do that is to get yourself into these different events and stuff, right? Because that's where people kind of network. We realized that there was, mutual benefits. They had great skills, but they didn't know what the problems were, and we saw problems. So that's how we started with that. And we did it as on the side during university. So obviously development was slow. We didn't have money to pay people. So it was very much, here's the vision we're trying to build. Do you believe in it? Maybe we can get somewhere in the longer term. And that's kind of how we started. And as we realized that it was a bigger problem, we decided not to just go down that route. We wanted to find what the heart of the issue was, which I said was long-term condition management and really understanding the behaviors. And once we kind of had some early interest from GP practices and said, actually, that is the thing that I want, we were then able to take it to sort of investors. And that's when the side hustle became a job, really, because as soon as money comes in, it's just an exchange of time, really, and then you can then really focus on it. So different for everyone, but yeah, you have to start to really get to the stages where you can actually take it forwards.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And I wonder, because a lot of our audience might be medical students or junior doctors who currently, when they think about innovation, they think about how to change the healthcare system, how to create change within the NHS. Do you think there's any lessons or any parallels that you learned through your journey with Suvera that would be, I know we said not to give people advice, but if we could make an exception in this case, any advice to you give to people that want to innovate within the NHS?
Yeah. Oh, it's funny because that's a really great question, and I would be asking that same question to someone else more experienced than me as well, because I really want to know the answer. But initial thoughts that I've gathered so far is that it does take a while in the NHS. Things are all very centralized. There's a lot of different layers you have to get through, so change doesn't tend to happen very quickly. However, having said that, I think that the things that we can see which are positive is that with COVID being obviously changing up primary care so much, we saw that they kind of went to digital solutions overnight. So there is an appetite for it. But as with healthcare, the thing that really triumphs is showing evidence. And it's a reason why I think these VCs, venture capitalists, have backed other industries that are lower risk. You know, the highest regulatory industries like your banking and your healthcare, they've taken a bit longer than more of your consumer industries because there's just less risk in those. And I think rightly so, because healthcare has got so many regulatory barriers. So I think if you're going to tackle something in healthcare, I think just be prepared that things will take longer. Your investors will know that as well. The sales cycles will be longer. And yeah, go with evidence first, because you know, we're evidence-based people. We don't prescribe a drug unless there's good evidence. So why would you prescribe a tech solution without evidence as well?
Yeah, of course. That's great. Thank you so much. And I wonder, what is your vision for Suvera for the next 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, we really want to be keeping people with long-term conditions in good health. We want to be part of the movement that shifts reactive care to proactive care. And we want to be just a player, and you know, someone that can support that movement, because it is the way things are going, and being able to ensure that we can include every patient and not exclude those who, you know, can't access digital technology. So really, we want to be the main long-term condition management provider.
Brilliant. And I mean, I really love the message and the idea behind Suvera. I think it puts the, you know, it empowers the patients. It puts this sort of steering wheel in the patient's hands, being like, this is your health, this is your condition, you know, this is a tool to help you manage it. But I guess another big part of Suvera is trying to create a behavior change, because as you said, it's not the you know, it's not the little nudge and a reminder that people need. It's the whole mindset and sort of a little motivational kick. How do you go about creating this motivational this behavior change, and also how do you then evaluate it, whether this actually, you know, changes how people manage their health?
Yeah, I think there was a very, very good questions in there. I think the first one was about sort of how do you engage people? And I think if you think about the healthcare experience today compared to other things that you go through, so banking, for instance, as well, or any sort of consumer app that you use, there's such a better experience. You engage with it, it's better user interface. With healthcare, there really isn't anything that makes you smile and say, wow, that was such a good experience. It's always so fragmented. It's so siloed, and it's just not very enjoyable. Nothing's cleanly designed. So I think there's a lot you can do to just make even a basic app a lot more user-friendly. And I hope that people kind of take note of how people like TikTok and stuff, you know, how they made themselves so engaging. There's ways in which you can do it. And I think it's important we do that with respect. And then the second question was around how do you evaluate if there's good outcomes, right? And I think the world is moving towards sort of an outcomes model, and it's really how are we improving the health of people? That's the main thing. Are we improving outcomes, i.e. clinical outcomes, reducing HbA1c, you know, improving blood pressure control, and are we doing that at a more cost-effective way? Those are the only two metrics. How you get there is sort of up for interpretation. That's why there's so many companies trying to do it, but you can't deny if someone reduces their HbA1c, that's the best outcome you can hope for.
Yeah, perfect, great, thank you. And just final question, you know, you advised us to immerse ourselves if we really want to get involved, just see what's out there. Do you have any practical advice? Again, I'm asking you for advice all the time, which is exactly what you told us not to do. steps that medical students, junior doctors who, they would love to get involved, but they really don't know how? What are the first few steps that you think
Yeah.
at a practical level they could take?
Yeah, I would say if I was to really, really give a detailed practical advice here, it would be, you see it this way, right? You've got doctors here, and you've got some doctors who are more interested in tech. Then you've got doctors who have completely stepped out of practicing. And then you've got this whole other world of just other professions. And I think when you're in medicine, you forget that there's this entire world of other professions out there. So I think just gently move yourself along. You don't have to go straight to speak to like a Google computer scientist, because then you'd be like, I don't really know how to communicate. Speak with maybe a medic who's doing a side hustle, then maybe move towards someone who's stepped out of clinical medicine, can really understand what it's like to be a medic, and then move along. And like I said, those organizations are really, really great. Follow them. Another practical piece of advice is don't be afraid to reach out to people. I want to be careful of how I phrase this, but people who have quote unquote made it, or who are successful in sort of conventional means, they haven't done it themselves. They've had so much support. They've had so many people giving them guidance. So don't be afraid to email them, LinkedIn them, Twitter them, DM them, ask for an introduction. They're typically the people who are more willing to help than you'd expect, because they know how hard it is to even take that first step. So use those channels, use those organizations, and just gently move yourself along that spectrum, and speak to friends who aren't medics as well. Really immerse yourself with different types of thinking. And that would be my advice.
Perfect. Well, Will, thank you so much for your time and all your wisdom, and thank you for joining us today. So thank you again so much, Will. And now over to our next speaker.
All right, thank you.
Thank you to everyone that made tonight's episode possible. Whenever our scholars are thinking about complex problems facing our health systems, we encourage them to think about how they make significant change in the world of healthcare. We are incredibly lucky to have some incredible scholars in the HLA. They use the HLA as a platform to take their ideas and bring them to fruition. If you are interested in the work of the HLA, why not join us at one of our future HLA events? Why not join one of our programs? Why not even become a HLA scholar? Thank you for joining us. My name is Johan Marlwaner, the director of the HLA, and it's a good night from all of us.